Hey everyone, you're on the Maple Leaf channel watching episode 28 of Science Cities. First things first, massive thanks for the super warm welcome to my early start DLC review. It blew me away so much that I got hooked just watching the views and comments roll in, and totally spaced on dropping this next episode. Today we've got one small content add-on. I threw this in mainly for first-time viewers or anyone who wants a quick recap on how we reached this point and where it all kicked off. Right after this intro, it's the real me. Key changes across the Republic, planning our new tourist zone, and finally we populate that city next to the raw oil fields. As always, timestamps are right below. Jump ahead to today's action whenever you want, hit that like button or subscribe if you haven't, let's get into it. If you're joining the series at this point, it can be difficult to understand the bigger picture. What is being built, where the resources come from, how money is made, and which project truly matters right now. And you are not alone there, believe me. So this is a brief guided tour of the Republic as it exists today. I look back at the decisions, the experiments, and the turning points that shaped it. Think of it as previously on, not through old footage though, but through a fresh reconstruction built from save files taken at key moments of the series. The setting is the early start DLC, St. Petersburg map. From the very beginning I had several goals, with the one long-term being production and export of nuclear fuel. The series is called Science Cities and it is based on a real existed, closed but populated with people towns and areas around the globe. It is a semi-roleplay playthrough where infrastructure development is combined with small narrative inserts. These story-driven episodes appear in episode 4, 7, 9, 17 and 23. To strengthen immersion, AI-generated imagery was actively used in those narrative-driven parts, which may not be accepted well by some of you. So take a look at my movie-making skills at your own risk. As of now, nuclear fuel export remains the final unfulfilled objective, but the Republic is already well into the second half of its journey. The story began with rail. A rail construction office became the foundation, followed by the planning of an industrial zone focused on gravel extraction and processing. From the first days, trains were used to move construction materials. This decision defined the rhythm of expansion and proved extremely efficient. The initial budget was modest, around 1.8 million rubles, and the game is played in realistic mode with moderate disasters and epidemics enabled. The first city was designed around proximity. Its residents lived close to the initial industries, clothing and food factories, because public transport in 1930s was simply inadequate. The plan was simple: people would walk to work. In practice, this required strict specialization of residential buildings and manual workforce assignments. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Still, it quickly became clear that exporting food and clothing alone would not be enough. Breaking even would take years. And tourism changed that. What began as an experiment became the backbone of the early economy. It stabilized finances, allowed the southern districts to be completed, and eventually made meat production possible. Around the same time, plank production was introduced to support further expansion. As grain prices continued to rise, agricultural independence became necessity. Farms were built to the northwest and later to the southwest of the city. At first, field capacity was enough to sustain the Republic, but surplus exports demanded growth, and farmland was eventually almost doubled. By this stage, the economy was stable but fragile. It was time to look deeper. Research revealed the true potential of the map. Most importantly, a coal deposit located directly next to the customs office. That discovery reshaped the strategy. Electricity export became the next experiment. Early profits were modest, but coal mining reduced import dependency and even generated export income of its own. Over time, electricity rose into the top 5 most profitable exports of the Republic. Encouraged by resource discovery, oil extraction and processing were planned immediately. The assumption was simple: oil would become the primary source of wealth. Reality proved harsher. Distances were vast, construction costs were extreme. By the end of planning alone, cost of building the infrastructure would have reached the 6 million rubles, not including the city itself. Alongside these ambitions, a brick factory was added. More for experience than profit, bricks were cheap, fast to produce, but turned out to be invaluable for construction. With this region fully planned and the budget finally allowing expansion, the Republic moved outward. A new challenge was chosen: full-cycle aluminium production, starting with bauxite mining. Aluminium is rarely pursued in most playthroughs. That rarity made it worth attempting. This decision demanded scale, a large city and a significant capital. To fund it, Two explosive factories were constructed. Explosive required relatively low initial investment and offered medium margins, despite rising chemical costs. Their impact was immediate. For the first time, the budget consistently reached 2 to 3 million rubles. Aluminium production, however, demanded enormous quantities of chemicals. To sustain it, local chemical production was planned. In theory, this would reduce import costs, strengthen the economy and allow completing the construction of the aluminium chain. Both alumina and aluminium plants themselves remain among the most expensive upcoming projects in the entire republic so far. The most recent development is a large agricultural complex, positioned between two cities. Food and clothing prices continue to rise, and long-term security requires preparation. An entire region has been planned to supply the whole republic. Some farms are already operational. The city and factories are next. This, my dear viewers, brings us to the present moment, to the point where planning and execution goes on. Now it's time to continue shaping science cities. Let's start with a short recap of what happened between the previous episode and the current one, and honestly there is plenty to be proud of here. At the end of the last episode, while I was settling the southern part of the city life, I couldn't understand why there were so few people at the railway stop. The reason turned out to be trivial, as usual an unfinished pedestrian path, actually two of them. Once construction was completed, the number of workers at the stop immediately began to increase. Even so, I went ahead and launched public transport trams to collect workers and passengers from all corners of the district. The first route operated by just 2 trams, bringing workers from across the city to the stop closest to the railway line. The second route, also using 2 trams with a capacity of 86 passengers each, distribute passengers and students around the entire perimeter of the new district. This allowed the medical university to be mostly staffed, relieved the overcrowded supermarket in the northern part of the city, and finally activated the entertainment infrastructure built earlier, making residents a little bit happier. Speaking of the medical university, I chose the research order you can see on the screen right now. My logic was simple. First, I wanted to reduce the negative effects of alcohol by introducing consumption limits. Second, to ease the load on medical facilities by training workers in basic and advanced healthcare principles. After that came a series of studies focused on preventative measures and resistance to pollution. This makes heating blackouts way easier to survive and shortens the duration of epidemics, which directly affects the tourism business. It's difficult to measure the exact impact of these studies, but it's definitely there. Both happiness and health indicators moved on closer to the desired values above 90%. Feel free to copy this research order, and in my next playthrough I will definitely build the medical university much earlier. One completely unexpected problem was a sudden electricity shortage. At some point I started receiving power outage warnings and couldn't immediately understand what was causing them. After enabling the appropriate overlay, the issue became clear. The early start power plant simply could not produce enough electricity to supply both the city and the industries. Once again, I was glad that I had two-way connection to the border transformer, so I simply switched it to import. At the same time, I already knew there wasn't enough hot water to populate the rest of the city. The existing heating substations were already operating at 96% of capacity. Building a single new heating plant from the modern industry era didn't make much more sense, due to its relatively low output, so I decided to build 2 from early access era instead. It was summer, so I figured I had time to demolish the existing ones and build at least 1 new heating plant before winter. Demolition was moving at full speed, helped greatly by no less than 5 demolition officers. It was also accelerated by the fact that I used explosive, completely by accident however. I simply forgot to uncheck the option in the menu. Despite leaving much more waste behind, explosive demolition significantly sped up the process. With written permission from the party, the Lenin monument was also demolished, but only at the condition that a new one would be imported later. After spending plenty of time rotating buildings with T and R keys, I finally found a suitable layout for the 2 heating plants. They were placed facing each other with one mirrored. Both had direct access to the coal storage, which was a secondary but still important goal. On the site cleared from the previous power plant, a brand new one was immediately planned. Its output is almost twice that of the old one. Hopefully this will be enough, at least for now. Construction volume across the entire republic was so high that the budget began melting rapidly, so I decided to finish the power plant next year and import electricity from friendly neighbors during construction. At the same time, construction of a container storage facility was underway as preparation for activating the food and cloth logistics chain across the Republic. To do this, parts of railway had to be dismantled as quickly as possible, the building placed and the tracks rebuilt. At the time, the project didn't seem particularly special. I didn't even notice any serious inconveniences from losing access to the train cargo station, and the building itself was completed fairly quickly. What I failed to account for was the complete depletion of all resources in the warehouse that had been supplying the city and both explosive factories the entire time. This mistake ended up costing almost 2 million rubles. A huge part of the population immediately fled the Republic due to the lack of goods and drinking water. This was an extremely critical moment. If I hadn't had nearly 4 million rubles available at the time, saving the Republic would have been almost impossible. The chemical plant came to the rescue. Without exaggeration, this is the largest construction project in Science City so far. The required construction resources were counted in hundreds and some like concrete in thousands. Transporting those materials from factories, warehouses and the customs office was slow and extremely expensive. By the way, tower cranes are essential here. Building project of this scale without tools that speed up construction means either very long building times or hundreds of workers tied up where they're needed elsewhere. The food crisis and the loss of around 3,000 residents naturally slowed construction even further. Work repeatedly stopped due to the work shortages. For a while I even had to manually manage imports to avoid going into the bankruptcy. There was a strong temptation to embrace capitalist comforts and take out a loan, but once again I managed to pull through. To be honest, this level of micromanagement was surprisingly engaging, and the result was absolutely worth it. After 2 full in-game years, the plant was finally completed and all resources required for production were already waiting in the storage. In early spring of 1959, the first passenger train carried workers to their very first shift at the chemical plant. I assumed that 200 workers would have been enough for self-sufficiency and small exports, but I was slightly mistaken. It turned out that 250 workers was the perfect number, enough to maintain stock levels and regularly export surplus chemicals. I honestly can't describe how happy I was watching the first batch of chemicals exports leave the Republic. Yes, the shipment was small, only 26 tons, but the profit, almost 200,000 rubles, was exactly what was needed. The budget finally started growing rapidly. What used to be the largest expense, measured in millions per year, turned into source of income, even if on a slightly smaller scale. Alright friends, welcome to the third part of this video. To be honest, I've been thinking for a long time about building a proper recreation and tourism area. Tourism exists in the game, it's profitable, it's interesting, and it's had some really solid hotel and attraction models. On the top of that, tourism is one of the official goals of this playthrough, and while I do have a couple of hotels in the starting city, I can't really count that as a completing of the objective. In my opinion, Science Cities needs a truly standout tourist zone, both visually and economically. Yes, as you can see on the screen, the budget is gaining momentum. And saying that tourism is exactly what the Republic desperately needs right now would be an exaggeration. But it's a goal of this playthrough, and if I'm going to do it, I want the result to be clearly visible on the map and immediately catch the eye. As you might have already guessed from what's happening on the screen, Workers and Resources keeps throwing new challenges my way. This time I discovered that on the Moscow and St. Petersburg maps, terraforming barely works at all. I even found a Reddit post confirming this issue, but decided to double check it myself. On a completely different map, I was able to freely change river paths and raise and lower terrain levels. Somewhere else I read that the issue might be caused by rocky shoreline layers, which dramatically increased terraforming time. Still, I kept digging, literally, on the planned area until I got the result close to what I wanted. All of this took around 20 minutes of real time, non-stop, so if you are into heavy terraforming, I strongly recommend avoiding these 2 maps. In my vision, a recreation area should match the spirit of the era. Back then, long seaside promenades were common, lined with cafes, restaurants and sometimes even attractions, all close to the river or coastline. A bit further back, you'd usually find first-line hotels and behind them residential zones for hotel workers. This layout became the core idea behind the entire tourism zone here. To recreate this as closely as possible in-game, I used mods. The most important one is called Granite Embankment. It's essentially a pack of around 21 buildings, all without collision mechanics, but they still have to be built like normal structures. The set includes promenade segments, parking areas of different sizes, observation decks with access to water, and even public transport stops, including tram stops. Most of these buildings are accessible and provide 1 or 2 workplaces, which allow citizens to visit the area. Since this is my first time building something like this, it is hard to say whether tourists will actually walk along the embankment, but the pedestrian paths should at least allow them to reach the area. I choose a promenade length of about 600 meters. First, I was honestly exhausted from terraforming, even with 10 bulldozers and excavators working non-stop. Second, I wanted the entire area to remain within walking distance for tourists. Just in case, I also duplicated the promenade with the road and tram tracks, so tourists can be transported from the railway station to the hotels by tram. If that doesn't work, I will build a passenger port and let tourists arrive by water instead. The promenade ends with another great building from the steam workshop, an amusement park built on a long pier. Only a small part of it stands on land, while most of it extends far into the water. Between the promenade and the hotel zone, I placed a series of attractions. Most of them are vanilla buildings, with one exception, a go-kart track. I looked through dozens of decorative modes, many of them are excellent, but thematically, they didn't quite fit this location in my opinion. After connecting everything with pedestrian paths, we move on to cafes and hotels themselves. Originally, I planned to place restaurants and hotels directly on the waterfront, but I dropped that idea. All of them require road access. And while building roads wouldn't be difficult, once everything is finished, trucks would start driving right through the attractions. I really didn't want that, but that's purely a matter of taste. As a result, cafes and restaurants are placed on the second line relative to the river. For now, I limited myself to 1 restaurant and 1 small cafe. An interesting fact for you: tourists in-game spend most of their money in hotels. Secondary services mainly affect the star rating, which defines travel quality. But even at just 2 stars, tourists will still come in large numbers. I chose 3 hotels in total, 2 4-star hotels and 1 3-star. The choice was based purely on their visual design. In my opinion, they fit the local architecture very well. The remaining space is reserved for sports and cultural activities. An indoor swimming pool will serve tourists during winter, while 2 tennis courts will expand entertainment options in the summer. In the far right corner, I decided to place a zoo. It's a well-modeled building and adds realism. Almost every large city has one, and this is clearly one of them. A modern cinema is one of my favorite buildings in workers and resources. It's a great capacity for the relatively small number of required workers. I'm not sure what movies people watched in 1960s, but even back then cinemas were extremely popular. The remaining area will stay open and function as a small park. There will be lit paths around the fountain, as well as large chess table, another excellent mod by the way. Later on I will add trees and possibly a small stone plaza. I prefer doing this after the main buildings are finished, since it's hard to judge what's missing just by looking at the blueprint layout. For now, this is the first look at the future tourist zone. It's not finished yet, but its overall shape already looks quite nice. If you like what you see, don't forget to leave a like and maybe even subscribe to the channel. To complete the first and second lines, we only need to add tram tracks and the pedestrian path. I will leave some empty space just in case and avoid building there for now. It might be useful later. Tourists will also need a shopping center. After all, they will want to buy souvenirs for friends and family. I'll give them that option by placing a small shop in the far section of the area. Behind the hotels, I will build a service pedestrian path, the kind you don't see from the front. This is where laundry is delivered, food supplies arrive, and service operate behind the scenes. For us, it will also provide direct access for future workers of the hotels and entertainment facilities. And here comes the residential area. This will definitely be a high-density zone, since we will need a large number of cooks, sellers, cleaners, and other service staff. At this stage, I am placing 4 panel buildings aligned parallel to the terrain. They will stand on elevated ground and be clearly visible from the river. Later, I will separate them from the hotel line with green spaces to give tourists a sense of privacy. As always, where there are residents, infrastructure is required. I'm not yet sure whether more hotels will be added, so I'm immediately placing a large kindergarten and school. For shopping though, There will be a small shopping center without storages. In the future, a local distribution office will handle food deliveries. We will also add a small clinic and a tram stop. If the residential zone expands, public transport will become essential. A fire station and a local police post are also needed, just in case tourists and locals argue while waiting for a carousel. The local industrial landmark here will be windmills. I will place 3 on each side of the park. If you've never used them before, here's a quick explanation. Windmills, big ones, can produce up to 35 megawatts of electricity, but they're extremely unstable and fully dependent on wind. By the way, wind speed is shown in the game. Just hover over the thermometer icon at the top of the interface to the right of the game speed controls. Windmills are useful for maintaining power in remote areas, things like gas stations or bus stops. They can also be placed next to a coal power plant, where they act like a lighter, helping start the plant for the first time or after a shutdown. In my case, all 6 windmills are mostly decorative. The tourist base will receive its main power supply from a full-scale power plant. For now, I will place additional electrical substations and heat exchangers and mark the locations of key infrastructure, namely power and heating plants. Knowing which power and heating plants I will be using, I measured 750 meters from the nearest residential buildings and placed them. Even though I've researched pollution filters and vitamins to improve resistance to pollution, I still calculated distance based on the rule that one pollution cloud equals 250 meters. According to the game, pollution radius is reduced by only 15% after the research, which isn't much. I have plenty of space here, so there is no real reason to save at this particular area. Between the buildings, I placed the cold storage, and opposite it a regular bus stop. Then I added a transformer and connected everything with high voltage lines. High voltage switch might be useful here, by the way, but that can always be added later. At this stage of the game, both demolition and construction are extremely fast. Next, I laid pipes from the heating plant to a large 300 cubic meter pump. From there, 100 cubic meter pipes connect the pumps to 3 local heat exchangers. Water and sewage come next. The existence of small autonomous wells is an absolute lifesaver. Seriously, devs, why does a well even need workers? I understand why a water treatment plant needs staff, but a pump at a depth of 50-60 meters either works or doesn't depending on power and water availability. Anyway, I placed a small pump and a treatment plant. For atmosphere, I also added a water tower. I don't use them often, and on elevated terrain they look very natural. Water substations were placed around the district. The pumping stations feeds water into a switch, then into individual substations through a small diameter pipes. The beauty of autonomous wells is that if water becomes insufficient, you can simply add 1 or 2 more, no extra work is required. Sewage worked out nicely. The main discharge station is located at a lower elevation than the tourist zone. The pipe's a bit too long, but that's not really a problem. The key was placing sewage tanks with natural slope. 2 out of 3 were placed successfully, and for the third one I had to add a pump. After connecting everything with pipes, the system was complete. All in all, guys, I think it looks solid. I'm confident everything will be finished by the next episode, and I will show you the final version then. Most likely the launch of this tourist base will happen after food and clothing production facilities goes online. By the way, the agro-industrial region is already in active construction and some farms are harvesting their first crops. But for now, let's move on to the final part of this episode. Welcome to the final part of this episode, friends. Today we will launch our oil city. It has been causing me a lot of grief, mostly because of fires. I am under the opinion that buildings that do not function, or at least those without workers, should not have fires at all. So I will populate this city just to stop rebuilding some of the structures over and over again. It will of course start consuming the resources a little bit, but I'm sure I will survive. So I guess everything is checked, and I hope this time around it will go as smooth as it possibly can be. I have about 500 people willing to move, so I will go with the buildings that are closer to the water and close to the kindergarten and the supermarket. So I'll go with this first. 1, 2, and 3. And let's see how we go. It is September, but it's still quite hot, 25 degrees. The city will still be on import electricity. I've got power plant and heating plant ready for workers, but I haven't actually planned the bus routes, which I will do. I've got about a month or so to do that. Alright, how are we doing? One worker without the job. That's a standard complaint. Unable to visit the church. That's okay. Kindergarten is working. Our supermarket is operational. School. That's fine. How are we doing with hospital? We're doing absolutely terrible because I forgot to buy a car. Let's do that quickly, and we need the speed ones. How about this guy here? And let's paint it. We can't paint it blue. That's sad. That's alright. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That should do it. Alright, well, I feel like everything is going okay. I don't have that many workers waiting on the platform so far. Maybe because I haven't built the pedestrian paths. But there will be some. There will be some. Alright. This one is good model A. Look at that. It looks amazing. Alright folks, looks like everything is going okay. We'll need to buy some buses and we'll set up the route to send workers to heating plant and power plant. But it's just the technical details. Overall, 93% health, 85% happiness. Need to work on that a little bit to increase that parameter to about 90. And that's gonna be it. So Oil City is our last big city that has been built, well, almost built. Next is going to be our farm region, and then we'll see what will come next. And that's the end of this episode, folks. Thank you very much for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit that like button or even subscribe to the channel. Every like and sub helps the series reach more people who love city buildings like we do. If you want to see something specific in the next episode, please drop me a comment. I have some plans about electronics, waste management and a new city closer to the uranium deposits. So far we are deep in the second half of the series and thus can try pretty much anything. Thank you very much for watching again, enjoy your week and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.